to half a star in its performance rating. And so a lot of work was done to make sure that those sorts of simplifications didn't unfairly affect our industry and see us going backwards for no change except a change in methodology. A lot of you don't see those sorts of things that we advocate on your behalf, but we're actively involved making sure that industry and their needs are at the forefront of regulators and decision makers at state and federal levels of government. Obviously, with COVID, we've been very, very heavily involved at a state and federal level, lobbying for stimulus. We've been working with our partners in HIA and NBA and other sectors to make sure that effective stimulus is coming through. And you're seeing that with the JobKeeper and job stimulation programs, but more importantly with the grants and the stimulus for housing and renovation. In Northern Territory, the programs around the home improvement scheme. They're all good things that are underpinning, I guess, first homeowner activity and renovation activity through this coming sort of next 6 months. Depending on what the economy needs, it's likely that we'll see a second round of stimulus. And so we're working with other industry partners to make sure that our industry is well positioned to take advantage of that. The feedback that I'm getting is that it's likely to be, if there's further stimulus to be rolled out, it's likely to focus in areas of social housing and potentially government or commercial building retrofit. And so we've done submissions with ASBEC, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, the Property Council, and a number of other aligned bodies to promote the need and the role of improved glazing in not only thermal comfort and the health and well-being of individuals in public housing, but also in other construction types and in other jurisdictions, to make sure that there's an ongoing activity level that doesn't just stop when the current stimulus finishes, and there's hopefully a pipeline of work to carry on and see us through this very strange time that is COVID. Equally, we've written to the Queensland Minister Nick de Brenni and also Eva Lawler, talking about the need for targeted response and targeted stimulus for our industry. We've worked with or liaised with the Department of Trade around the need for increased focus on our trade controls at a time where all of you are so focused on making sure your business survives. We've highlighted the concerns around non-compliant products and the potential for people to cut corners at this time where they can cut cost out and potentially make themselves more compliant, more cost effective by putting in products that aren't fit for purpose. And we've raised that profile with government to make sure they understand that now more than ever they need increased focus on compliance. And so within the WTO frameworks and within the trade frameworks, highlighting that the products that come in, now is the time to make sure that those globally sourced products are suitable for the market, and it's an effective mechanism to make sure that it is a fair and level playing field for all of our valued members, that the products that are in here stand for the right standards and the right product attributes that we want to see. This slide overly simplifies all the work that we've been doing. You'll hear later on from Russ around all the different areas of technical advocacy that we've been working on and articulating. But it's fair to say whether it's the stimulus actions, whether it's the trade negotiations, whether it's the engagement with both state and federal bodies around building regulations, and also the pathway of NCC, and also our work with Australian standards. Currently, we're over on 11 different standards, and we're working to really try and make sure they're top of mind and that the industry needs are being advocated for. I have noticed there's been a couple of hands go up, but I can't see. No, there's no questions. That's fine. Happy to take questions at the end, but that gives you sort of a broad update of the things that we've been working on. And as always, as valued members, more than happy to take feedback of issues and concerns that may need to be understood at the state level or indeed nationally. This last year, we've all of you would have no doubt heard, if you've been looking at our magazine or our electronic emails, the launch of our new accredited company program. Both AGWA and also AWA had accredited company programs, and the last year has seen us meld those two together. AWA had a very robust compliance program that covered all of its window manufacturing members, and AGWA had a really effective program that not only covered compliance but looked at other areas of excuse me, other areas of best practice in relation to safety and training. And so the last year we've spent trying to meld those two together to create an effective program that means something for our membership and indicates that an AGWA member stands for compliance, but also best practice, and encourages all the appropriate things that an industry such as ours should represent in terms of employee safety and training and best practice. When we look to the future, we have now rolled out this glazing accreditation program, and many of you have probably heard about it for the first time over the last couple of weeks. But when completed and everyone has gone through the process, we will be the largest building product accreditation program in the Southern Hemisphere. Our aim is to make sure that when governments are thinking about and talking about compliance and specification, that they're able to understand that an AGWA member by default means someone who's able to demonstrate compliance to the appropriate standards, and that they're also held to account. Over the last 12 months, the AGWA board has reviewed a number of members for breaches of code of conduct, and we actually had to terminate the membership of one member because the behaviours and the characteristics that we saw were not in line with what we expect from membership. So to all the commentary that I've had when I've been out and about talking to members about the need for compliance and best practice, we do follow that through, and we are looking to try and drive and improve the industry behaviours, not only through our engagement with government, but through these self-regulation programs as well, such as our accreditation program. For those of you who aren't aware, there are three pillars, as I said: compliance, which looks at whether you're compliant to 2047 or 1288, and there's an assessment procedure for that. That's quite simple and easy to understand, but it covers off on the core elements to make sure that we're able to demonstrate that our members know and understand and are able to practice what's required in those standards. We've also introduced, as I said, skills and training, which is, once again, being able to demonstrate that employees in your company, in this case, if it's 1288, at least one individual has been trained in the last 3 years to understand the principles and the attributes of that program. And then safety as the final pillar. So often when we go around, we hear stories of near misses or incidents in the workplace. And I think it's a really important pillar for us to move forward and grow. When I talk to government and we're out there asking for consideration around regulatory activities or consideration for an industry activity that we're wanting to promote, being able to present the safety attributes and the fact that we want our employees to go home safely is a key discussion topic often, and almost a requirement to sit at the table and ask for support from government. Being able to demonstrate that as an industry we're interested in our employees and we're wanting to make sure that they go home safely is, I think, a key value that we want to nurture and grow. And so to that end, the safety attributes are looking at effectively the bare legal minimum at this stage. It's our hope that in time this assessment process will go through and cover off sort of a hierarchy of what good, better, best is in relation to safety, and help give you as leaders, managers, owners of businesses an understanding of how to drive better safety behaviour in your organisation. To give you an example, the checklist or the assessment is not overly concerning. Many people hear the idea of an audit and get daunted or overwhelmed by what that may be, thinking, the tax man's about to turn up. But really, it's just a checklist process, as you see on the screen here, outlining the key elements that are required or involved in that audit and being able to show and demonstrate how you comply with those in your organisation. It's quite simple, quite easy to follow. There's a team here to help you through that process and talk you through any questions you may have to facilitate this. Together, I think if we're able to demonstrate that as an industry, we're able to show that we not only have robust standards, but that each and every member is able to demonstrate compliance. It's a very powerful thing for us to move forward together. At the end of it, once you've completed that process, the association will issue you with a compliance certificate. So an accredited compliance certificate, safety pillar, or skills and training program. Sorry, I thought there were some questions for me, but they seem to be technical questions in relation to the audio. We've got the safety accreditation and also the skills and training. It's our hope that those three pillars will work together in partnership with each other to be able to demonstrate to your consumers, to your customers, that your company stands for something, that you're standing shoulder to shoulder with compliant, accredited companies and being able to demonstrate best practice in our field. It's absolutely a growth journey. And, you know, if your company has any questions around it, if you as a leader in your organization sit there and go, oh, I'm not really sure as to how I can complete or what's required in this safety pillar, we have a team here to help to try and nurture you along and make sure you've got the documentation that you need. And I reiterate that, you know, the initial assessment is purely trying to demonstrate the legal requirements. Many of you will see that we circulated a document recently around the first workplace manslaughter charge in Queensland. And the failings of their health and management system saw the owners of that organisation fined over $3 million for not having these kind of programs in place. We don't want that to happen to members. And so we're here to support you and work with you to understand your obligations and make sure that you have the tools and the understanding to be able to redress those. The other key thing I wanted to bring into everyone's attention today was the Master Glazier program. In the past, the Master Glazier program has been a really vibrant part of the glazing industry. And we've added to that. Over the last year, we've added in the apprentice glazier and the foundation glazier statuses to make sure that there's a pathway for people who've entered the industry from apprenticeship, which many of you have come into the industry with, all the way through to you know, late career development, showing continual learning as part of that career engagement, but also nurturing you through that process. We're opening apprentice glazier and foundation glazier roles up, which is effectively foundation glazier is a person who's just finished their apprenticeship. That's free to all apprentices around the country, and we're working with the TAFEs to roll that out to make sure that, you know, when someone signs up for a TAFE course, that they're able to demonstrate and understand the benefits of being part of the glazing community, the association, and the commitments that they have to further learning and personal development. It's also important to note that in the past, this was a standalone program. The board has considered the benefits that this program has not only to our trade and to our industry, but also to employers. And so we've made the decision this year to put Master Glaziers as part of you know, the company's membership. So now if you've got people in your organisation who you know, are skilled in their trade, they can be recognised through this pathway, and that's free as part of your membership. So if you've got 1, 2, 20 employees that you need to recognise and develop and encourage them in their trade and in their development, there is now a pathway that is part of your membership to the association that they can learn, develop and grow in their trade and be recognised through this status. And I've had lots of discussions with companies that say, oh, look, it's great now. You know, we've got probably 10, 2, 3, 50 employees that we want to try and put on this pathway so that they've got a sense of commitment to the industry, a sense of personal growth and improvement, but also that spirit of engagement that shows that we hold each other to account and test our personal development as an industry moving forward. So I'd encourage you to reach out to the association if you want to learn more. There is an assessment program for obviously entering that, but it really is an exciting, you know, breath of fresh air to the program. And you know, we're getting daily new applications coming through. So I encourage you to get involved while you can.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little talk about energy efficiency and the NCC. Particularly, I'm going to focus a little bit on compliance requirements, which are a little different these days than they have been historically. I'll touch on a few bits about past performance, and I hope some of it fills in some questions that you might have. So here we go.
Michael, are you able to put that into slideshow view?
Yeah, how's that?
Beautiful.
I've even got a screen back now, which is a nice touch. Okay. All right, so we'll touch on glazing performance and terminology with specific regard to whole of window performance and AFRC compliance and what that involves. And we'll go through a couple of the key changes with regard to NCC 2019 for both Volume 1 and Volume 2. Okay, so with regards to AFRC, or WRS data as it's more often termed, AFRC is referenced in both of the NCC versions through the guides and through the attachment notes. There are a few things with window data that are important. First of all, they are done under specific sizes. And they are done under specific sizes so that there's always an apples to apples comparison between two window products. So window A as a sliding window and window B as a sliding window are assessed under the same methodology and the same size. There are some quite strict rules in the background that go through about how those values with regards to U value and solar heat gain coefficient for the window are generated. And they exist so that it doesn't matter who performs the assessment, the answer should be the same. Okay, so with regard to solar heat gain coefficient, I don't know how many of you would have seen the solar heat gain W and U value and UW terms. They are specific with regards to the whole of window. So they are essentially just the solar heat gain as an entire entity. One of the things I am going to touch on is thermal bridging, and thermal bridging is a little bit of a buzzword at the moment, and it is one of the things that the NCC has placed a lot of focus on, both with regard to volume 1 and are placing a lot of focus on with regard to the changes that will be coming through for 2022 in residential. Okay, so solar heat gain. Basically, the solar heat gain for a window system is, it's an assessment of how much solar radiation is coming through that window. So it includes both that is directly transmitted and that is which is re-radiated. It also includes the energy for a window system that is absorbed by the frame itself and re-radiated to the interior. There are some fairly aggressive environmental conditions that both of these are done under. Solar heat gain is done with a warm external air temperature of 32 degrees and a typical air conditioning load on the internal at 24 degrees. Then there is a daylight amount that strikes that window, and it's calculated from those values. U value with regard to window, it's a measure of the non-solar loss or gain through a window system. It really is analogous to R value, except it is essentially thermal conductance as opposed to an insulation value. So the two of them are usually a reciprocal of each other. There is no solar radiation that exists in the calculation for U value. U value in Australia is calculated with regards to the NFRC or ASHRAE conditions, and they are extremely aggressive. So they're calculated with a minus 18 degrees Celsius external temperature and a 21 degrees internal control temperature, and with a reasonable wind speed on the outside. So as you can imagine, that is a very large driving force. Now, the reason that is done is because if the standard environmental conditions that products received in Australia, the U value would virtually be the same for every product. So this is a way of generating the spread of performance so that you can assess them for how they react. Once again, happy to entertain any questions as we go along. Okay, so thermal bridging. Now this is probably going to be the most important part of what I touch on today. There is a formal requirement in NCC 2019 in volume 1 that thermal bridging must be included in glazing performance. Now thermal bridging is a term which is analogous to a thermal short circuit. With regard to window systems, it means that all the elements that are involved in the fitment of it must be included. So if that includes subframing, angle glazing, if you are not taking into account the performance of those elements, you are not demonstrating compliance to NCC Volume 1, 2019 for any jobs that might have been done under those DAs. With regard to NCC Volume 2, it is still business as usual, so the standard WERS values, which at this point, most of which don't contain any subframing data or any fitment elements, which are variable, they can be used and should be used. You might find with regard to multi-residential that there will be some requirement for some of the consultants that will include the use of subframing. And as with all of those things, it's always up to the consultant what gets done. Okay. So with regards to NCC as a whole, one of the things they tried to do is they changed the way in which it was being assessed. It's no longer glazing and climate specific design. trying to generate the best outcome for that. What they have said is that the performance of the structure itself has to be optimised to lower its CO2 generation during its operation. There have been some new additions. First and foremost, everyone would know that there has been a very large increase in the requirements. So that is the deemed to satisfy performance requirements. They've been made extremely strict, and we'll go through a little bit of that soon, but they have also been alternate compliance routes made. So JV1, which is a neighbours assessment, JV2, which is a Green Star, both of those are as built, not as occupied, and JV3 has been tightened up a great deal so that a lot of the loopholes that exist have been tightened. For instance, one of the ones that used to exist is that obviously if you were using gas to generate power usage for a building, and you can, or whether you're using electrical power, standard electrical power, you can generate a different outcome. And one of the things that used to happen is people would do the JV3 reference building using one of those energy forms, and then they would just change, and all of a sudden it didn't matter what they did, they had compliance. So, and that's part of the real reason why the drive towards CO2 consumption has been done. So those two energy forms and their CO2 contribution have been aligned correctly. So this is just a summary page of what the major changes are. Now, you'll notice that thermal bridging is at the top. This is obviously the one change for the glazing industry, which is first and foremost, it should be addressed. Obviously, the new compliance methods are just Green Star and neighbours. JV3, if you go through section J, the requirements within JV3 are now extremely detailed. There are occupation and occupied zone usages, times, heat loads being generated by individuals. All of those sort of things have been very aggressively detailed, and that's to make sure that a lot of the loopholes are being closed. Significantly, with regards to the glazing industry, has been the creation of overnight operation buildings, and that has been class 3 or hostels, boarding houses, and a lot of the medical and ward areas for medical buildings have extremely stringent energy requirements. One of the underlying drivers for that was so that they would not be used in a deemed to satisfy mode, so that they would be going through a JV1, JV2 or JV3 compliance route. As a positive for the glazing industry, there has been some allowances given for shop front and display glazing, and they are considerable. So one of the things that I have done is that if you are supplying product into those types of structures, it is no longer a requirement for heavily tinted glass to be used. You can actually get away with a clear IGU and demonstrate compliance. Spandrel performance. There has been significant changes in the code with regards to glazed spandrel performance, and it has been to do with thermal bridging. So the spandrel performance within the code now both has a deemed to satisfy types listed, and also permits the assessment via AFRC methodologies. Wall performance. Glazing, as you would note when you go through section J, is no longer a separate section. It is entirely contained within the performance of the external fabric or the wall. So it is the wall as an entity which demonstrates compliance, not a glazed portion and an unglazed portion. There is a daylight amenity built into it now, and that is so that there has to be a minimum of a 2% daylight factor, which is forcing on people when the window to wall ratios get very low, that still the area is healthy for the occupants. Infiltration. This is a workmanship clause which has been placed into the code. And what it is saying is that for the defined areas that they have done, they are actually generating the quality of workmanship that a Windows system should have. And that's one to be aware of, and that a testing methodology for compliance exists for that. Okay, so as I went through, wall is now the term that determines the performance of the building envelope. It guarantees wall, glazing, spandrels, brickwork. It doesn't matter, they all have a requirement as a wall. For the glazing industry, that wall performance has actually been placed in as a U-value performance, which is quite advantageous for us because it means that the methodologies that exist within WERS and within the AFRC can now still be used and to generate outcomes. One of the terms you might see used is window to wall ratio, and that is really just the percentage of glass that exists in an elevation or within a facade. One of the things that wall doesn't include is vents and grills and non-glazed openings into the structure. It's just because mainly they don't know how to deal with it yet. The other term that you will see written is a facade solar emittance. Now, this is merely a term describing the solar heat gain performance of the entire wall. It's analogous to the same, and because the solar heat gain of a non-transparent element is 0, you can always calculate what the performance of the wall will be by multiplying the glazing performance, solar heat gain, by the window wall ratio. So whether that's 0.6, 0.7, you can obviously calculate an outcome quite easily. Changes to JV3. Now this is both good for the industry and bad. One of the things they have done is they have reduced the ability to trade off facade performance for services. That does not mean that they cannot trade off the performance of the wall itself. So that means you can take some of the wall performance from a western wall and put it on a northern if you want, but it means that the overall building fabric itself, it's a lot harder to trade off, and that means that the performance of glazing will improve. When a JV3 is being done, they've said, okay, no longer is it acceptable for any calculation method to be used. You now have to use one that is compliant and certified against ASHRAE 140, which is merely just it demonstrates the reliability and quality of a calculation engine. There is a human comfort level that now exists as mandated within JV3. It is the same one that exists within Green Star and Neighbours. So those 3 compliance routes have been aligned. There is very large sections in JV3 that determine what all the variables that must be included in the simulation and comparison against the reference building are. And this is really just to reduce gaming that was going on. And it also means that Green Star and Neighbours align with JV3. So it doesn't matter which method for compliance is being used, the same outcome should be obtained. So the DTS requirements, or the deemed to satisfy requirements for most buildings or daytime operated buildings, you can see that the U value is required to be less than or equal to 2. That is quite stringent. It is not as generous as it has been previously. And you will see that the solar emittance factors or the solar heat gain for the wall are listed there. So obviously some of the warmer climates, you can see they are quite stringent. I'll flick on to the next slide. We'll give you an idea of what those numbers actually mean. So as you can see, for a solar emittance of 0.13, if you're using a high performance glazing system, and I've assumed in this case that it's going to be something like a tinted double stack low E IGU, which is going to have a solar heat gain performance in the realms of low 0.2s. 0.23 is pretty average. So you can see that really generates just under a 60% maximum performance of the wall before a Green Star, neighbours or JB3 compliance route would need to be done, which obviously allows a lot more trade-off. And that's one of the things that underlies within the code now, is they're really trying to push people in those directions rather than having simple deemed to satisfy. Okay, overnight buildings. Now this is something which is important, and they are extremely stringent. There is no way of working around that. These values are extremely low. The only building that I'm aware of that meets the deemed to satisfy for a U value of 1.1 and that solar emittance is actually the Armidale-based hospital. To give you an idea, that has a window to wall ratio, I think, of about 11%, and uses some extreme performance materials. So really, I haven't seen any compliant jobs coming through yet for these types of buildings, but they will be extremely difficult to comply with. And I suspect there might be some magic from the consultants in the background. To give you to put some of those numbers into performance. So once again, I've assumed a high performance IGU. So based upon the solar heat gain requirements, you could have a 30% window to wall ratio, but based upon a standard, and I've used a floor to ceiling assumption here for what an aluminium glazed window system would be, which is a U value for the whole system of about 3 with that type of glass in it. You would be allowed to have a 3.6% glazing within the entire wall. So as you can understand, that is very difficult. So even a hyper performance thermally broken system, you would still be less than 10% or just on 10% for what you could possibly do as a deemed to satisfy. Really, they're just forcing everyone's hand into having to do high level analysis to move the design around to suit its climate, conditions and use. However, I do believe that they are far too strict and that one day there will be a very large pushback against U value in some of these climates and some of these areas. So I touched upon shop front and display glazing and its implications before. So basically it means that a clear IGU and even a moderate standard aluminium frame system satisfies these installations, which is a great thing because there's no longer installations like some of the car dealerships where they're having heavily tinted high performance glass products in, which is changing the appearance of the vehicles. And I actually think this is one of the things that the NCC did a great job of. Spandrels, I touched on spandrels before. Spandrels have been overstated in the NCC for their performance for a long time. To give you an idea, with regard to some of the centre of performance values that have been assigned for spandrels, typically their real performance is less than 30% of what the estimated is. And there has been instances in some of the warmer climates where the glazing themselves have been lower quality because they've overestimated the performance of the spandrels. With I think the highest I've seen is an R value of 4, which in reality has a U value of 0.2, so quite poor performance. These are treated in 2 forms in the NCC. There is deemed to satisfy types, and there are performances given for those for standard aluminium and thermally broken glazing systems. But the code allows you to do an AFRC or WERS simulation on those. You will get a significantly better outcome, both for U value, if you do the full simulation. The ability for those ratings to be done exists currently, and it's something I'm certainly making sure that you are all aware of. Infiltration, we touched on this before. So essentially the ability exists for someone to go back and do a blower door assessment on an install glazing system and show that it was it didn't meet its legislated requirements. And that is something which I think we all need to be aware of and mindful of, that exists now. It's not overly stringent, but there is a workmanship clause for glass and glazing that exists. Okay, so quickly we'll touch on Volume 2, which is the residential section of the code. Now, Volume 2 hasn't had a change in stringency, but it is definitely going to be harder to comply with. And no doubt, I believe some of you might have started to see the changes in residential glass types and residential glass performances, which are starting to filter through. The reason for that is that what used to happen is if someone was doing a NatHERS assessment, so Accurate, BERS, First Rate, any of those programs for compliance, if it was in a cooling market, they used to make sure that the cooling performance of the structure used to meet the requirements. What you have to do now is it has to demonstrate compliance both for its heating and cooling performance. So there are obviously in mixed climates in particular that will generate some differences in the glass, and much higher performing glass you will start to see being requested. So the verification method for the reference building, which is something which has been at times abused in certain markets, not in this market, but in some of the other states, it is no longer allows NatHERS software programs to do the reference building comparison. Now, the reason for that is that multi-level in NatHERS programs always used to assume that everything was a slab on ground for its analysis. So when it was an elevated level, the performance of the calculation engine wasn't optimized. That is something they are working on at the moment and will probably be fixed up in time for 22. But the outcome of that will be, and that we will all see for the next few years, is that glazing performance is going to increase. And it's going to increase in hot markets, cold markets, and particularly mixed markets. Okay, so with regards to the changes that are coming through, there are no changes expected for glazing until 2025. I think we're all aware that residential and multi-high-rise is going to have a sizable stringency change in 2022. And I believe there will be some other requirement changes as well that are starting to filter through. But I don't believe that is going to be in our worst interest. I believe that better performance glazing is in everyone's best interest. And that's all I have. Probably before I finish up, one of the things that I will say for the NCC 2022 residential review is that I would expect everyone to see the influence of those changes being larger on glazing than we would have experienced previously. And the reason for that is a lot of the low-hanging fruit, so the easy things to improve in residential building design, have already been done. So I think this time around we will all see a larger increase. Are there any questions?
There was just one there, Michael, about what does PMV stand for?
It's predicted mean vote. So that is a way, it's a mathematical assessment of the number of people in a given space who are comfortable at any given time. So the PMV requirement that's written in, it's a PMV value of plus or minus 1. But what it means is that 95% of people need to be comfortable for 98% of the time in all the occupied zones in the building. So it's quite stringent. It's really putting people's comfort first and included in the energy assessment for the building.
That looks like that's all we've got at the moment, but if you want to hang around just for when we finish the next couple of presentations, and we might, or we will actually open up to people who want to ask questions, but keep typing them as we go in the Q&A, but at the end we'll give you an opportunity to ask a few questions. We'll just get you to put your hand up and I'll turn your microphones on. But thank you very much for that, Michael.
Okay, thanks Gary, thanks Michael. It's very informative. I think it's fair to say, as Michael's alluded to, there's a fairly steep learning curve for us all. But more than that, there's a learning curve for our clients, our builders, our homeowners, our architects. We're all on this journey together. So information is power. So, you know, it makes sense to come along to sessions like this and keep your skills up to date and your knowledge current. So, yeah, the next couple of years are going to be interesting. I thought I might just share a couple of screenshots and some visuals of the facade calculator. This is replacing the old glazing calculator. And it's a way of demonstrating compliance with the DTS solutions. I'm not going to go into it in detail because we could spend 2 hours just talking about this, but I just wanted to, I guess, familiarise you with what it looks like. And if you have any further questions or you want to understand a bit better, please contact us. We're more than happy to help you through how this all works, but we'll do that at another time. But basically we have a general information page where you enter in all the details, not much different to the glazing calculator. And there are 3 main steps that affect the result. The first one being glazing, the second one being walls, and the last one being shading. Now, Michael spoke about how the NCC 2019 Section J talks about this as a whole, but the facade calculator allows us to build up an elemental approach. So program in the glazing attributes, the wall attributes, and the shading attributes to calculate the result for the entire envelope. This is what the glazing system looks like. It gives you the opportunity to enter in various attributes about the window or the glazing system and the whole of window U value and solar heat gain. And then you then go on and put in the wall details, which is shown here. I won't go into this too much detail. I don't expect many people will be dabbling in this space too much, but it's possible depending on what your business model is and what sort of engagement you have with your supply partners. But this is what it looks like in terms of entering in the wall data. And you can see what happens is you get a green or a red result to tell you whether you're compliant or not. There's also in here elements of shading. Yeah, the outcome is a report, which is effectively a pass or fail, not too different to the old glazing calculator. The main difference being that it's taking into account the 3 elements of the wall U value, the glazing U value and solar heat gain, as well as the shading to calculate the solar admittance. There's a really good publication from the ABCB on energy efficiency in volume 1. Allow some time to read it. I think it's a couple of 100 pages and it's hard yakka. It's pretty hard going, but there are some really good worked examples in there. If you're so inclined and you want to understand the science behind it, you can go through those worked examples, grab a calculator, a pen and a piece of paper, and you can do it yourself. It does actually explain how these calculations are derived. So that's a valuable exercise if you really want to understand it. And of course, this publication is available on the ABCB website for free. I want to move on to what the other changes in the NCC 2019, and they're fundamentally around acceptable construction practices. ACPs are effectively a DTS solution, so our recipe for compliance. So I'll just flick through those. Fundamentally, it all comes down to, or the most relevant part of it for us is window installation. The ABCB invested a lot of time into expanding the ACPs, particularly in volume 2. And we were engaged with the ACP working group under the ABCB committees. And what fundamentally we were trying to address is this word adequately. This is the previous provision. So this is the provisions of 2016 construction code. And you know, there was one sentence in there that said all openings must be adequately flashed. Now it depends on what state you're in, and how robust you wanted to build a building. That word adequately was certainly our experience was it was interpreted very differently from one region to the next. Queensland's got a pretty good track record of doing this well, and that's mostly because you know, the cyclonic influence and all the rest of it. But that certainly wasn't the case nationally, and a lot of work has gone into beefing this up a little bit. So I'll just go through what the new provisions cover. They're broken down into two types, basically one for masonry veneer and the other one for clad construction. And fundamentally, it now mandates head flashing and sill flashing for masonry and veneer construction. It goes through and outlines various provisions like the amount of overlap, the positioning, the drainage, and what's required in the installation of flashing. And these images are not from the NCC, they're from our guide, but they are consistent and comply with the outcomes of the NCC. So that's a fairly substantial change for some. For others, it'll be business as usual. In the lightweight construction market, it's appropriate to add jam flashing as well. So effectively the same provisions. Some of the measurements differ slightly. In masonry veneer, it's 150 mil flashing. In timber and composite cladding, it's 110. I don't pretend to understand why the difference, but that's where we landed through the consensus-based approach that is the ABCB mandate. And it's effectively the same. The head flashing and the sill flashing must drain to the outside, and jam flashing is added in the lightweight construction sector. I think it's important to share with you the work we did a few years ago on developing the videos. If anyone's got any questions or wants to understand, in particularly in the residential space for builders who are not quite sure what these new provisions entail, all these new provisions are consistent with our recommendations from several years ago. So the videos that we've got on our YouTube website are compliant, and those videos are freely available for you to share with your clients and your builders to help them through the installation process. As I said, it's on our YouTube page. It's probably worth mentioning also that there's a lot of other videos in there that we've published, some on energy. I think there's some safety videos added recently. It's worth going in and having a look. You can go onto our website and follow the links. It'll take you through to our YouTube channel. And yeah, it's worth a couple of minutes just to have a look at what's on there. I think I've just covered that, sorry. And as a final note, we have published a guide for residential window installation, which covers all of these requirements and goes a little bit further. It also covers direct fixed masonry and solid masonry. These are, I guess, still recommendations. They're not, there's no mandatory provisions in the NCC for those construction types, but there's certainly some strong guidance provided by industry and outlined in this guide. And also it covers the subtle differences between window types, like windows and doors obviously have different, particularly sill flashing details. They're very different. So it explains the differences there, and also shows, you know, the differences for UPVC and timber as being different framing types. You're probably mostly all aware that AS 3959 was revised in 2018. So it's a little while ago now. And in line with that, we've published a new and updated guide. Fundamentally, there haven't been a great deal of changes to the requirements. Most of the revision was focused on other areas of glazing. Glazing was considered to be quite a mature building component in terms of this standard, so there wasn't a lot of change. It was mostly based on correcting some anomalies or some errors that were in the provisions. But there are a couple of additions, particularly around the fixing of screens, requirement for metal fixings, and clarification around hardware requirements, when metallic hardware is required and when it's not, and some provisions for shielding of things like sliding door rollers, for example, which are predominantly non-metal. There was some ambiguity as to what complies and what doesn't in that space. So those elements have been clarified in the new standard. And our guide has been developed to really break that down into, you know, simple common language. Standards are often hard to read because of the terminology used. We've written our guide to be just plain language, easy to read, understandable by anyone. You don't need a doctorate in engineering to follow the provisions. And we've added, interestingly, or I think quite a good addition, was a quick reference table. So if you need to understand what the difference is between bow 19 and bow 29, for example, you can go to those quick reference tables and see quite clearly what changes as you go up in a bushfire attack level. That's on our website and free to download for members. A heap of other information. We're constantly working on publications and information for you. We get a lot of questions. We love questions. We encourage you to give us a call anytime if you've got any questions, because that really gives us a good indication of where we need to direct our focus. If we see questions repeating or emerging issues coming from nationally or state-based issues, we can pivot and adjust and develop. Where we see these trends emerging, we put out publications on a regular basis. We tend to average 4 to 6 a year. So quite busy in the background. You can see the one I've got here on the left is the window flashing requirements for NCC 2019. There's a very succinct 2-page fact sheet that you can hand out to your builders if they're not sure what the changes involve. That's free to download. We've got a guide on condensation management, possibly not a critical issue in Queensland, but certainly in other states it's an ongoing issue that we see coming up every winter. We also have a fact sheet on Section J, which explains a lot of what Michael was talking about earlier, and outlines how it all works and what the key issues are. So that's worth a read. It's a longer key message. It's probably one of our largest ones. Safety glass labelling is always an issue. Don't think it's ever going to go away, but there's a fact sheet on what the requirements are there. And I can't quite read this last one. Oh, the glass splashbacks. We've republished that one. That's an older key message that's been updated. There's another one that's just been published recently that's not on this slide that outlines the weatherproofing requirements for buildings. So what we're talking about there is the relevance or the application of Australian Standard 4284 versus AS 4420 and 2847, and how they link together. Commercial buildings and cladding, and the interface between the wall and the window and the weatherproofing requirements and how that can be tested are outlined in 4284. And there's a verification method in the NCC which allows building designers to demonstrate compliance with the NCC. So there's some important information there. It's an emerging issue as stringency is increasing, air tightness, and all these issues are becoming more and more important, and particularly with all of the work being done as a result of the Shergold Weir report and non-conforming building products, we're seeing increased activity and interest in the relationship between 4284 and 2847. So that's worth a read also. Again, jump on our website under the members section in the resources. There's a key messages page and a table which lists the, 40 or 50 key messages we've got currently out there and constantly adding to. That's probably the main issues that are current, but there's a fair bit coming through the pipeline which I wanted to share with you that'll come into effect over the next 12 to 24 months. Probably first up, probably most relevant to us is a revision of 1288. That standard was last published in 2006, so it's well past its 10-year revision period, and consequently it's now being revised. The current project is limited in scope to only section 6 and 7, so that's covering sloped overhead glazing and balustrades. And the project scope is in section 6 to increase the tables and information, the calculation methods, to include three-sided support and cantilevered overhead glazing. And in section 7, balustrades was only added to the NCC in 2006, so it wasn't in there previous to that. So it's time that we clarified some of the outcomes. It's been a bit of a rocky road for the last 14 years with that part of the standard, and it is commonly misinterpreted. So there's a lot of work being done in that space to work through clarifying what the requirements are. And just to visualise that, we're all familiar with the interlinking handrail clause, or most of us probably in that space, who work in that space, have products in that space, we'll be familiar with. There's this ambiguous clause around interlinking handrail, and I'm just throwing up a few photos here of balustrades that every single one of these images that I'm showing are actually non-compliant with the standard. And that's because the standard doesn't provide solutions for things like spigots, and standouts. They're just not covered in the current standard. So a lot of these things are getting through and being certified as being compliant with 1288 through, misinformation and misinterpretation of the provisions. So, this is why we see this. We get reports from industry. We hear about it in the newspaper, on the news at night, when these things fail. It always grabs attention, and there's an opportunity for us there to improve the outcomes. So, as I said, section 6, we're looking at improving information. There's a lot of work being done in that space. The technical committees and the working groups have really moved a mountain to get this across the line. We're in the later stages of drafting. I think formally the drafting process closes on Monday, and then we'll go into editing, and then public comment in around 6 to 8 weeks' time. So, there's a lot of work gone into it. For section 6, part of the project is we used to have tables which only gave us sort of aspect ratios, and they were difficult to read, and they weren't granular. They were sort of every. There wasn't a lot of information there. They were difficult to use. These tables are a much better way of calculating what the requirements are, and they're analogous to, they're very similar to the wind loading charts in section 4, I think, where you've got the height and the width, or the length and the width of the glass, and then you draw a line, and it clearly communicates what the glass thickness is required. So this is a draft table, an early iteration of the tables we've been developing, but that's fundamentally the objective, is to give us more information, easier to understand information. And we've also added thicker glass types. The old tables were limited to 1238 and thinner. We've added these, larger, thicker glass types in the DTS provisions. So much more fit for purpose solutions. We've also added a method of test. So for those balustrade configurations that are outside the scope of the current standard, we've added a normative appendix, which is a method of test that can be used to evaluate the compliance of a system and demonstrate that it meets the requirements of the standard and the code. Additionally, we've got work going on with the wind loading standards. This is just part of the normal review process. Every 10 years, the standards get revised. 1170 is, I think public comment is closed on 1170 now. And fundamentally, they're just updating the standard based on more modern information. If you think back 20 years, we used to have manually measured weather stations, at post offices or lighthouses, things like that, and they were manually checked every day, and twice a day that data was sent off to the Bureau of Meteorology. Now we have thousands of automated systems giving hourly data, and all of that information has given us a better view of the climate and wind load, or the wind conditions across the country. So all that information has led to a bit of a remapping. Anyone's familiar with it, there's a map in the standard which allocates the regions. The boundaries between those regions have been adjusted slightly. Some new intermediate regions have been introduced. And there's also a bit of development done on, the phenomena of cloudbursts or very high intensity storms that don't last very long. Those phenomena weren't covered in the previous standard very well. So a fair bit of development has gone on there, which all leads to just a slight increase in stringency. I don't think there's any real significant change, but obviously an improved methodology leads to slightly different outcomes in some circumstances. And because 1170 part 2 has changed, that means that 4055, which is the wind load for housing standard, that also needs to be updated. So there's a current project to update that standard as well. And there's quite a lot happening there. I won't go into too much detail on that now because it's still under in the drafting process, but we'll provide more information on what the outcomes are in due course. There's also a current project to revise AS 3740, which is the waterproofing standard. Now, this is a great opportunity that we've been able to grab by the horns, because the provisions for shower screens in this standard were ambiguous and very non-specific, and we've been able to add a lot of content to provide further guidance to building designers and installers about what the waterproofing requirements are, particularly around the interface between the waterproofing membrane and the water stop angles and shower screens themselves. So there's been, and again, a lot of work being done there, and that standard is expected to go to public comment shortly, and we'll be able to share more detail with you as that comes to hand. Obviously, we reflect on the Christmas period before. It seems like so long ago with this COVID, but we had, the worst bushfire season in our history just only 6 months ago. There's multiple investigations and commissions ongoing at this stage, and out of that, there's some new intelligence and better understanding of performance of buildings in bushfires, and that will have a naturally, inevitably flow on to the bushfire standard. At this stage, there's no active project to revise the standard itself, given that it was only revised in 2018. But we have got some early feedback from those investigations that, as far as glazing at least is concerned, the buildings perform quite well. So what we're seeing so far is we're not expecting to see any really massive changes to the glazing provisions in 3959. But what we are seeing is a renewed drive by government to push for retrofit solutions and adapting existing building stock. So there are opportunities in there, and we're participating in those committees on developing that guidance material and those publications to inform industry and consumers on what options are available. As you can see, there's a lot of work going on. We've got 4666. Now that's not a current project, but I think it's worth mentioning that it was last published in 2012, so it is due for a revision soon. But there was an amendment in 2018 which addressed some of the barriers to compliance that had been faced by industry. I guess the crux of this message is that 1288 requires IGUs used in windows and in buildings to comply with 4666, and there are some testing requirements attached to that. And there hasn't been a great uptake from industry historically in the last 10 years, but there has been a renewed interest, and this is primarily driven by the increases in stringency around energy efficiency and the increase in usage of IGUs. And together with IGWA and our association partners, we've been working quite hard on raising awareness in the 4666, and we've added it to our accreditation program. So as part of the window audit now, that we're looking for verification that the IGUs used in the windows are compliant with 4666 and have been tested to 4666. So yeah, it's something to keep on your radar. We are seeing more and more IGUs being manufactured than ever before. So the longevity of those and the durability of those units is important for our industry. We have a key message on that, which outlines and explains the the installation aspects of IGUs. We're currently working on a supplementary fact sheet to go with this one, which talks about the testing requirements and the compliance aspects of IGUs, and that should be out shortly, I'd suggest in the next couple of months. So, yep, that's another one on the radar. Now, coming back full circle to the energy topic, I know it's all our favourite one. NCC 2022, this is the next iteration. Michael spoke about what we're expecting to see. We are expecting to see increased stringency in volume 2. We are expecting to see, under the trajectory, increase in commercial, another increase in stringency in 2025 for commercial. So, and we've got staged increases slated for industry all the way out to 2030 under the COAG trajectory. So this is an ongoing issue, and it's the hot topic. So, you know, commensurate with that that target or that trajectory, we've been working very hard to future-proof the needs of industry to make sure that you know, the importance level of windows is recognised in the construction code, and that the solutions are appropriate and achievable. The slide here shows a white paper we've developed where we're talking about not only improving the information through to the NatHERS system, but also working with Standards Australia to develop local standards, adopting ISO 15099 as a methodology which underpins what we do currently, but also supplementing that with local climate conditions, sizing and parameters for windows and the thermal performance assessments of them. And to have those standards referenced in the NCC. And really that's all about removing a lot of the ambiguity and the gaming that's available under the current provisions. And we're participating with, or working with the ABCB to deliver that. Just to explain that and its importance, you know, a U value is not a U value. It's not well understood, particularly by government, that if you measure a window under European values, you're going to get different results to that same window measured under Australian or NFRC conditions. They use different climate conditions. They have different window sizes. They measure edge of glass value differently, and they measure solar heat gain very differently. So these are all the differences between the way windows can be modelled under the NCC at the moment, and that lack of standardisation is problematic for the future of our industry if we're going to maintain a level playing field. So that's an important body of work that we're working on. And this is, I guess, what it looks like. This is the project proposal we've submitted to Australian Standards Australia. We're working with them to adopt 15099 and to put in place, this is a, you know, gobbledygook formula, but it's an algebraic expression which allows us, which is in 15099 and allows us to scale up window performance to at-size ratings and also model performance with additional mullions, transoms, and substitute different glass types. So this type of methodology, introducing that to industry, I think will be a big value add. And this project hasn't been formally approved, but I think we're on the cusp of getting that that committee constituted and underway. In terms of regulation, this is a scoping study that was published beginning of this year. We provided feedback to the Building Code Board on the scope that they're proposing. There were multiple questions raised in the scoping study that we responded to, and following that, we were very happy to advise that we've established a seat on the residential working group. It's something we haven't had before, and we now have a seat at the table, and we're represented in our own right with the ABCB, and that's really come off the back of a lot of advocacy in raising awareness and a recognition of the Building Code Board of just how much value glazing has in the thermal performance of buildings and its importance level. So we're able to advocate with a much louder voice than we've perhaps had in the past, and we're looking forward to continuing that conversation on an ongoing basis, not just in 2022, but also out to 2025. As I said, we're on the residential working group, and we're also on the commercial technical working group, though we're not expecting to see any great increase in stringency in volume 1. We are on that committee, and we continue to monitor the drafting of those provisions for any adverse outcomes, and also take advantage of any opportunities that might present themselves. So in terms of where we stand for 2022, we're here. We're actually probably a little bit further along. The drafting process will close in November, so we're a bit better than halfway through that process now. We're dealing with multiple reports. We get some kind of report from a consultant on a near monthly basis. In fact, more weekly these days. And they tend to be, anything from 30 to 300 pages long, detailing all of the what ifs, we could go this way, we could go that way, what are the best outcomes for industry. And we've got a working group and a team of people, including Michael, who you heard from earlier, constantly, these are all over our radar. We're keeping up to date with the developments and making sure that industry's needs are represented and that industry has a voice in the development of these provisions for 2022. To give you an idea of the kind of responses that we've had, we write papers, we emails, lots and lots of to and forth talking about what's important and what government need to address in terms of the thermal performance and windows' role in better outcomes for everyone, for building occupants. So that's fundamentally it. I guess probably the closing comment would be NCC 2025. As Clinton said earlier, it's not that far away, and it's important that we're making sure that we continue this conversation and get the best foot forward for our industry. So as Clinton said, we had a meeting with Department of Industry this morning, just talking through what 2025 might look like and what are the important things we need to put on the radar. So that's about it for me. I'll probably close off there. Is there any questions come through?
There is a question there, Russ. Are there any plans to create a standard details for flashing of insulated panel construction?
There is a lot of discussion around acceptable construction practice or DTS solutions for other construction types, and insulated panel construction is one that's firmly on the radar. Part of the problem with that is it's a fairly new or emerging construction technique. So it's been challenging to get consensus on what those requirements should be. I'm not confident we're going to get it across the line for 2022, put it that way. I think the progress those initiatives have made over the last sort of few months has been not encouraging, despite all our best efforts. I hope we are able to deliver something. I'm not confident we will. I'm not sure if that answers the questions or not, but that's probably the best I can do.
Is that really a product where you need to build a wall and do different flashing details and actually test it?
There is that opportunity, and that's fundamentally what that fact sheet that we published recently is about. Is that the NCC does provide a verification method to demonstrate conformance with performance solutions. So if a building designer is designed a building with, it doesn't matter whether it's foam construction or Hebel or any other form of wall detail that they want to test, the test methodology is available for them to use to demonstrate that conformance. So
thank you, Russell. So we'll get you to hang around because we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. Now we should have Mark Frost there on the line. G'day, Mark. How you going?
Sorry, just unmute. Hi. Good, thank you.
Excellent. So I'll just hand straight over to you, Mark. We've already introduced you at the start of the webinar, so fire away, and then we'll get on to any questions at the end.
Sure. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present. So just a bit of background. So I'm the Chief Economist at Business Australia, and I work in Business New South Wales, which is the policy and advocacy division of Business Australia. So we're part of the broader Chamber of Commerce movement. So we've got members that sit across all industry sectors of all sizes. So we do tend to take a bird's eye view when we look at things like the impact of coronavirus, and indeed earlier in the year, as I heard at the back end of that presentation, the bushfires. Certainly these things, it's been a bit of a journey for the start of this year. So I might just sort of kick off by, I've got a bit of a slide deck that I might just share with you, because I think it probably makes it easier to talk through some of these. So I should have that up now. So I guess, look, I suppose we probably all, in our own ways, have experienced the rather devastating impacts of COVID-19, and indeed even the beginning of the year with other things like bushfires. And we do regular surveys of our members and businesses to get a sense of how things are tracking for them. And I guess the clear message is quite grim. We have regular business confidence surveys, and we ask two sort of, we frame that in two ways. First being, we ask them how's their business at the moment, and then we ask them, how do you think your business is for the next 3 months, and or will be for the next 3 months. So in this chart here, you can see the drastic drop off in confidence, particularly evident in that expected the dotted line series there, which is for the next 3 months. Now this is a little bit old. This one we did in March, and we actually have our current one out in survey at the moment. But this really underscores the impact that we've seen in this current quarter that we're in. So the dotted line really reflects where things are right now, or in that period post the lockdowns being implemented from March onwards. I guess one of the biggest ways that we've observed this and the impact and the actual that we can actually measure this impact to really understand just how devastating it has been is by looking at the impact on the labour market. Probably this best captures the impact in the sense that if you look at this chart is hours worked. Often when we talk about the labour market, we think about unemployment rates, and that's the one usually we're thinking about. But for various reasons, the unemployment rate hasn't been the best one to look at, including because people have just left the labour market. People have been stood down rather than retrenched. And a lot of people have just given up looking for work, so they're not necessarily being picked up as unemployed. But when you look at the hours worked series, what you essentially see is that the equivalent of 1 in 10 Australian workers are no longer employed, essentially. So that might not show up in terms of unemployed people, but if 1 in 10 hours that was worked before coronavirus is no longer being worked. So if you think about all of that idle capacity in the economy, in terms of skills, in terms of economic capacity and output, it really is huge. What that means for our economy is really quite devastating. I guess one of the sort of the things that I guess economists usually think about in terms of these types of shocks that can affect the economy is what it means for well, what economists would call the output gap. So the output gap is essentially the difference between where we know the economy can be performing at and where it actually is sitting at. So what you can see from this this chart, now this is based on the RBA's growth forecasts over the next year and a bit, is a massive decline in the March quarter. Now that's sort of the early phase impacts of coronavirus, including some of the border closures and early supply chain impacts we saw when China was locked down, and so that's sort of that's the first drop and a few weeks of the lockdowns we had here in Australia. But where we'll really see the biggest drops is in the June quarter, which has just finished. So we'll get that data in September. So there's a bit of time lag to really understand how things have been, but it's pretty bad. So we're probably looking at a decline in the order of around 6% in terms of where we were June last year. So absolutely huge. But what economists, I guess, are mostly concerned about is closing this gap. So because at the end of the day, this is the person sitting at home that doesn't have a job, that there's no demand for their skills. So what we see at the moment is that probably 2 in every $5 that businesses expected they would be making at this time when they were doing their budgeting and financial plans, before the crisis, 2 in $5 in terms of revenue that they thought they'd get, they haven't received because of the various lockdowns, the demand, lack of demand, supply chain impacts, and so on. So that's huge. And of the 2 in $5 that businesses haven't received, about half of those, so about 1 in 5 of those dollars, is due to the government lockdowns themselves, and then the further the remaining relates to the demand story. So now the restrictions, the lockdown measures, we don't have to be so worried about those insofar as we have very clear control over them. So it's very easy to unwind them when the appropriate health conditions are satisfactory to do so. And we made some pretty good progress, I think, up until the last couple of weeks in terms of the outbreaks in Victoria. But most states have done a really good job and have been able to remove those restrictions. But the bit that we're most concerned about is the demand part. So because that's very hard to get back to normal. And so I guess going forward, if you have a look at this chart, really what it's showing is this gap is persistent, and this is a demand story. This isn't sort of the shock of the shutdowns. This is the demand failing to sort of pick up. So this is where I think organisations like ours, we're really thinking about this and thinking, what do we need in the economy to make sure we can close that gap as quickly as possible. In terms of, I guess, the things that we think governments need to do is to shore up business confidence and then consumer confidence. So government has an important role to play here insofar as they're essentially the backstop. You know, they provide the social safety net for households. They we've seen the massive impact that programs like JobKeeper has had to keep businesses afloat and keep them trading and operational. So I guess we want, what, at least in terms of our advocacy priorities and our policy priorities, the things that we'd like to see from government are those sorts of things that can allow households and businesses to go out and spend and invest, hire people, even just keep their staff on as they've currently got on the books employed, because if because they have this sort of effect where it all collapses. It's like a deck of cards. If you remove one one piece at the bottom, the whole foundation sort of ends. So, and I guess more recently, you know, we're quite concerned at sort of what's happening in Victoria, not just from a virus outbreak perspective, but for the potential that has and the signals that sends to businesses in the rest of the country, because even businesses in, you know, Queensland or Western Australia or New South Wales might say, oh, well, that doesn't affect us directly. But if you're looking at this and the potential for this second wave outbreak, it can have a real chilling effect on your willingness to make some of those crucial investment and hiring decisions. So we're probably past the peak of kind of negativity that we had in early March, but it's still quite vulnerable. And this chart up here is really looking at all the Google Trends data that, you know, what are the searches, what are the Google searches, what are people worried about? So topics like recession and lockdown and cancelling your holiday, these sorts of things sort of have already peaked, but certainly when things like you know, the current Victorian outbreak happens, that has a potential risk. So look, as I said, JobKeeper has been critical. We did a survey of our members recently, where we tried to understand what the impact of JobKeeper has been for them, and most importantly, thinking about September when JobKeeper ends, and it's not just JobKeeper, it's a whole raft of other business support measures. The other day, we heard the banks say that they would extend some of their lending support measures, but you know, even then we've heard, you know, a lot of issues and a lot of businesses unable to get access to funding from the banks, and it not necessarily being their first choice anyway. So so that's sort of one side of it, but JobKeeper has just been the by far the most effective policy response we've seen. It's kept, well, you know, we've had 2 out of 5 businesses telling us that they wouldn't be able to have remained open if it weren't for JobKeeper, and their staff being much better off. But the concerning part, I suppose, is only 1 in 2 businesses will be able to maintain their current hours and headcount when JobKeeper payments stop. And 1 in 3 businesses haven't made any kind of plan for what's going to happen when it stops either. So when we look at the data on the industries affected, there's a clear sort of category of, there are sort of 2 categories of business that I think we can sort of point to. The first being those that have been directly impacted by lockdown. So particularly hospitality businesses and tourism businesses that just haven't had people through the door. But we think that a lot of those businesses will be quite well placed to recover. That is, except the component that's, you know, highly contingent or exposed to international visitors, and we'll get to that a bit later. But those businesses are pretty well placed. But our concern is that there's a second cohort of businesses that are going to suffer from the second round effects of this. So even already we've seen a lot of business services, you know, organisations that supply services to other organisations. That's just dried up. There's no demand. They're seen as discretionary. So they've just, you know, those businesses initially affected, just they can't. They're looking to cut costs, and they're the first place to look in doing that. We've got many of the major CBDs still trading well below where they'd normally be insofar as people working from home and those sorts of things. So come September, I don't think there's going to be, or we don't see that we're going to be ready for sort of a direct conclusion to JobKeeper without anything in place to sort of transition away from it. So we're thinking in terms of tapering JobKeeper, making sure there isn't that cliff when not just JobKeeper, but all sorts of measures like payroll tax relief and you know, rent, the arrangements that were made for landlords and tenants, all that scheduled to end pretty much at the same time. So There's a review, as you may be aware, that's currently underway, and we're expecting some announcements on the 23rd of July when the Treasurer gives a sort of a mini budget update in terms of the impact of JobKeeper. In terms of, I guess, one of our concerns, and today we released a report relating to apprenticeships and the massive drop-off that we've seen in terms of apprenticeship numbers, and we're really concerned that there's going to be this sort of I guess long-lasting impact in terms of businesses unable to find people with the skills they need, because we've seen a massive drop-off already in apprenticeship numbers in both non-trade and trade apprenticeship tracks. And our forecasts that we put out today suggest that and that's just going to have a flow-on effect, that a massive reduction in apprenticeship numbers. So that's a big concern for us. We've put some proposals forward around making sure that employers are positioned to keep taking on apprentices, because it's very hard when things are so uncertain and the pipeline isn't necessarily guaranteed as a business to take on new apprentices. But if that doesn't happen, there's going to be these flow-on effects in terms of skills. So we've put forward that there should be a wage subsidy to enable businesses to do that. Now, in terms of a national story and what does this mean for different parts of the country, I think we might see potentially a two-speed recovery. So, if we think about the Australian economy, it's quite diverse, really. We've got states like WA, Northern Territory and Queensland that have a relatively strong resources sector that can still continue to sell those and get them out, dig up all those things that they iron ore and gas and the like, and ship it offshore, albeit perhaps at a lower price, but nonetheless they're pretty robust to coronavirus. They're things that particularly, one of the things that tends to happen if a country like China decides that it needs to pull its stimulus levers, as it will, one of the first things that means is a whole bunch of buildings going up in the sky, and that creates huge demand for resources that we've got to sell, and that's what happened after the GFC. So we'll probably be pretty well placed. Those states that have those resources will be pretty well placed. As well, there's this whole story around which parts of the country are actually free from coronavirus. So, there is probably a bit of a split there in terms of Southeast Australia. So, Victoria and New South Wales are probably and even Tasmania, the least, I guess, or certainly nowhere near as well protected as some of the other parts of the country. So those other places that can pretty readily open up trade and commerce are going to probably have a bit of a head start in terms of well, certainly Victoria. I think New South Wales has done okay too, insofar as we've based in New South Wales, but we've opened up most parts of our economy, pending not having a second outbreak. But certainly, we know that Northern Territory, for example, has been going pretty well has been open a lot earlier than other parts of the country. I guess the other part is dependency on overseas arrivals. So parts of the economy are very well, certainly in terms of our services exports, the southeastern states are much more heavily geared to service exports like tourism, education, and certainly places like Sydney and Melbourne, entry points for international visitors. So they're more dependent on or more exposed to the closed international border. Though of course Queensland is also very dependent too. So there's particularly a lot of the parts of those coastal communities that are heavily dependent on overseas visitors and to contribute to the demand for those product offerings. So that's going to have a different impact across different parts of the country. And I guess more generally, that services story. So one of the things we've, even just a simple thing like cleaning buildings. So on the one hand, there's been a boon because, there's immense appetite to make sure, public places are sanitized properly and cleaned. But people that had contracts to build, to clean office buildings, for example, they've just been cut back because there aren't people in them. Similarly, hospitality businesses that are based in CBDs, they've just got no business anymore. So where you do have, and Victoria is probably particularly exposed to this, where you have those service-based economies, they're probably going to be a lot slower. So I think you'll probably find a bit of that divide will probably play out in terms of the southeast versus the rest of the country, with New South Wales and Victoria probably lagging the rest of the country. So there's a lot to this, and of course, a lot of speculation here. We really don't know what's going to happen the moment we have outbreaks in other parts of the country. That all changes. But look, all said and done, I think, pending just putting Victoria to one side, I think Australia's actually done a really good job. We've done certainly much better than European countries, than the United States, and I think we have a real opportunity to sell this message that Australia is a really safe place to come and do business. We're attractive. We've got a good, effective government that can get basic things right. So, we'd like to see us leverage that and sell a positive story to people who want to potentially consider Australia in terms of doing business, investing, and even working too. So, hopefully we can get some, we can leverage our strengths and attract, people who have a lot to offer to the Australian economy. So anyway, I'm not sure how much time I've got, but yeah, look, that's the presentation I prepared. Happy to take any questions there.
If you could hang around for a couple of minutes, because we're going to open up the microphones to questions, but we've just got a quick 5 minutes from our health and safety and training manager. So thank you very much for that. Hello, Mel. How are you going?
Hello. How are we, everybody? Yeah, I recognise that we're sort of getting close to the end of time, and to make sure that people have got time for questions. I just really wanted to touch base and say hi to everybody and just remind them that the AGWA have put a lot of effort into preparing documents and things for you. They're all available via our website. There's lots of HR assistance, that things like working from home policies, return to work, COVID safe, all those kinds of things. We've prepared them all in Word documents so that they can be modified and changed to suit your individual business needs. A lot of information. Safe Work Australia is being very good with a lot of documentations and guidelines for people in terms of any changes. I guess probably the biggest issue is the COVID situation changes so quickly that then everyone's trying to scramble to catch up. So we're trying to get as much documentation out as possible. So that would be always your first port of call. And if you've got any other questions, please get in contact with me. The safety documents, there's lots of safety documents and templates of safety documents up on our website as well that are available to help you with your audits as you're starting to go through the process. And again, most of them in Word format, so you can amend them to suit your individual business needs. Also, any questions? Clinton's mentioned a lot of the other things that I'm focusing on at the moment, including the Master Glazier program. And then probably the final thing is I'm hoping that you will manage to get access to and view our mental health video. We focused our toolbox talk for the month of June on mental health. situations like we're currently in, we always need to make sure that we check in with each other. So just helping you have those difficult conversations from within your organisation. Again, all of that is available on our website. The link to the video that we put together in conjunction with Mitch McPherson from Stay Chatty down in Tasmania, and some templates for toolbox talks as well as a webinar that we did run, and the recording of that webinar that may help you sort of have those difficult conversations. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I'm trying to make sure that updates are important and informative. I'm trying to not flood you with anything that you don't need to know, and make sure that you get the information that you need. If there's anything that you need, though, please contact me, or anything else that you think that the AGWA can do for you, then let us know and we can look into sending it out to all members. But yeah, that's about it from me. Thanks, Gary.
I really appreciate everyone's attendance. Hopefully this format's been helpful and informative. As always, hopefully you've seen here with our industry partners and also with the internal team, a commitment to add value to your business, a commitment to help you through what is a very, very strange time in the economy of Australia, in the businesses that you run, operate and lead. We're here to help you through it, to support in the best way we can, but also to make sure that we keep our eye on the future of our industry. There is a really bright future, and we need to make sure that we're getting through this together, and that we're supporting you to make sure that we have a vibrant and exciting industry that I know and all of you know that we can have. So feel free to drop us a line, reach out to any of the team, and I look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you very much for your time, guys.
And thank you very much to Michael Baker and Mark Frost for presenting to us on the webinar. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
much appreciated. Thanks very much, guys. Have a safe week, and feel free to drop us a line.